Hi everyone. Welcome to the latest in the Just COVID-19 Utilities webinar series. That Just have been sponsored. So welcome back everyone. I know you've got a good audience. Just really quick kick off. Just do a bit of an introduction while everyone is joining. So this is we've had three in these series already, and really it's been sort of based off the discussion we've had. This webinar here is really based off the feedback we've had and the discussion we've had, where we decided just really to slot in an extra bonus session, really to drill down on digital journey and open banking, which has been a hot topic of conversation over the last three webinars. So just to recap where we are today, so the first webinar, we talked really around consumer impacts around COVID-19. And just to commission some data, we went through some research data that they commissioned. In the second webinar, we then just discussed really around how the utilities company could respond to that, just based off the feedback. And then in the third week, we discussed really particularly around vulnerable customers and standards around this in particular, and how we can sort of generate standards. Open banking in particular came up as a real sort of like consistent theme within that. It was quite a topic of conversation that we were having, and really based off that theme, what's happened is Just have gone out and commissioned a little bit of extra market research, specifically to explore digital and open banking in particular. So what we're going to do in this webinar is just start to explore that a little, and we'll explore the issue a little bit with the panel as well. So the format for this week is going to be very much similar to previous weeks. I'm going to ask Nick really to run through the data, followed by a discussion across the panel members we've got on your screen today. And we're also going to ask a series of polls throughout the webinar. Please do get involved, and there'll be time for Q&A right at the end. So before we start, as ever, I need to do a little bit of housekeeping. So just really quickly, the session's being recorded but will not be shared, so you're safe to ask any questions. The panel members are all visible and audible, but the attendees can't be seen and heard, and everyone was muted on entry. So, so for the panel members, but please remain on mute unless you're speaking, just to minimize any background noise. If you do wish to interact, we've left the Q&A open, so please ask questions there, and we'll pick those up and try and weave those into the discussion. But if we don't get to all the questions, what we'll do is we'll either try and ask them at the end, or we'll have just distribute them with answers from the panel towards the end, after the end of the session, to all the attendees. And if you've got any other follow-up questions that you think about afterwards, and that was a great question I should have asked during the webinar, please follow up with us directly. We're happy to answer questions individually as well. And like I say, there's going to be a series of poll questions throughout the webinar, so please get involved, answer those, and we'll sort of be discussing those as we go along. So without further ado, let's just do the quick introductions. So really quickly, my name's Chris Warburton. I'm a principal consultant at Arum. Arum are a leading independent consultancy in the CNR space. We've also got Nick Georgiadis, who's the MD of Just. Just are the UK's first marketplace for digital analytics and high-cost enforcement solutions, and they've done a lot of specialist work in utilities. So Nick, give us a wave. Then we've got Martin Kirby, who's the head of credit risk and collections at BusinessStream. You just give us a wave, Martin. And we've got Sandy Duckett, who's a long-time associate of Arum. He's an expert in utilities and currently working at Bulb Energy. And last, we got Andy Norman, who's got extensive experience in the utilities industry, most recently at British Gas, where he ran the supplier network, DCAs, and field collections. And you just put up your hand. Normally we have Jamie Waller, who's the chairman of Just and Arum, but he sent his apologies this week. He fortunately had a last-minute meeting with the Cabinet Office, so that was one he wanted to make sure he'd attended, really. So he sent his apologies. Sorry he can't be here. So maybe just quickly go through the survey results, and to do that, I was just going to hand over to Nick, who's just going to quickly run through them. So this is a survey that Just had quickly commissioned. Nick, do you want to just quickly run through the results? Nick, you're on mute. Always happens.
Now I'm not on mute. Apologies for that. Um, so firstly, we asked around 2,000, or YouGov ran a survey for us asking around 2,000 people um, whether they would use open banking and in what circumstances, and also if a visit was required, how would they prefer to have that visit? And we've been doing work in both the utility sector and local government. So we thought we'd also ask some questions specific to certain sectors as well. And I think the results. I've got two slides to give some of the results. The results were actually quite interesting, I thought, and raised some questions for the utilities industry. So if we go to the first slide, what you can see here is the number of people that would, or percentage of the people that would give access to open banking and the circumstances in which they do that. So the blue bar set is if they were given more time to pay a bill, and the green bar if they were given a discount on any bills, and the grey is for other reasons. What you can see is it is definitely clear that they want something in return for giving you access to open banking, and they want a discount rather than increased payment terms. So they're willing to trade for the access. The thing that I found most interesting here was this is exactly the same population. We're asked the same question about local council and utility providers, and they were twice as willing to give their local council access for a discount than they would their utility provider. And I think that raises some questions of how, if the utility sector take this up, which was how you effectively build that trust and engagement, and what other things we can do to do that. And the other thing that we saw, which I think fits with most people's expectations, is the younger population that are most willing and likely to give you access there. And actually, that teams up quite well with the current situation. With what we saw with in our earlier presentations, we've seen that actually it was the youngest group that were most concerned. So you'd be helping the most concerned by giving this out as an option. The second question that we asked on the next slide was if you had to speak to someone directly and you had the choice of a physical visit or a Zoom call or the likes, how would you prefer that that to be conducted? And the overwhelming response was, if I need to see someone to have that conversation, then I much prefer to have that by an online video call. And actually, I think whilst there was a decline at the older age group, I think it was a good representation across there that it was broadly accepted. This one was a little bit odd in the fact that actually for their local council, they're slightly more higher preference to a physical visit, but still the vast majority would happily have and prefer to have a virtual visit. That's the results of the survey. I think for me it raised a lot of questions. I think Chris is going to ask the panel questions around what we can do after seeing those results and how we might get better engagement.
Thanks, Nick. I mean, I think we had to just add to the level of results as well, which is just the industry appetite around open banking, and we're chatting to a couple of open banking providers over the last couple of weeks, and they're just saying about how they're getting interest. And I think it's quite interesting to look at what the open banking industry is saying in terms of pushing that and having almost like that market demand versus what you're then seeing in terms of how that then links through to demand coming from the customer in terms of like what's acceptable versus what's not. So I think I think the first piece we were just gonna talk about was just a little bit around, I suppose, industry awareness, and then and then we'll talk a little bit about customer adoption type challenges as well. So because we know that the open banking industry is very keen, obviously, to to get out there more. But I suppose if we just put up the first three questions, just to start off, it's really around, well, what's the awareness within the utilities industry, and how prevalent do you think it is in the current conversation? So I don't know if you put up the first question, which is just really around what is the level of awareness around open banking. Now I know we've been talked a little bit about it in our series of webinars here, but it'd be good to sort of understand. I suppose I'm going to ask Martin, particularly just being within the within Business Stream, in terms of like what's the level of awareness that you think there is within your company, and I suppose just a reflection around how that means from an industry point of view, either in terms of open banking, and I know you're aware of it, but then how visible is it in everyday sort of meeting?
Thanks, Chris. I think two parts to that. At everyday meetings, the visibility is not there. I think we are starting to sort of understand it. We took the SME taxonomy version 2.15 information into our systems to try and look how we sort of implement that. So I think from a senior level, yes, we're aware of it, and we're very close now to having this built into our applications as such. And as you know, I'm a promoter of this, and I think it has got a real good decision credibility going forward, especially as we're trying to manage regulator and financial decision and do the right thing for the customer. So it's a great platform for that. And also, I think the other thing that's coming out of this is that we create this openness, which helps us around the brand and the person and the customer. So not well known below the senior level. It's not day to day in meetings yet, but we are starting to bring this information from the taxonomy through to our systems.
It's like it's being talked about in terms of strategy, it sounds like. Sandy, I just given your experience, it'd be good to just sort of get your view, really, I suppose. You got any comments?
Yeah, Chris, I think the awareness is low, across utilities, and I think it's low across the customer base. But I think it's a fantastic tool that can be used to increase engagement with the customer base, and also improve the reputation of the utilities. I think the slides that Nick presented there just highlight that for some reason that customers or consumers, they have less trust in utilities than they do in councils, and that result really surprised me. So I think there is a real benefit for utilities in raising awareness within their own company, but also engaging more with their customer base, because the customer base is going to see, quite a change in their income as we move forward, as mortgage holidays come to an end, as furlough payments come to an end. So what you're going to start to see is, I think, an increase in DD cancellations, a further increase. We've seen a surge, but it seems to have levelled off a bit. But I think there'll be a further surge as we move into the second half of the year. And it's really important that this proactive engagement with the customer base and customers start to, one, understand the product, because I think, a lot of them won't understand it. I think they'll feel that it's invasive. So that engagement is key, and it's important not just to engage when you're chasing the debt, but to make them aware these are options that are available to them.
I think the trust is an interesting, definitely an interesting angle. We just put up the second poll question, which is really around open accounting, and Nick, you and I had a conversation around open accounting, which is sort of like the company piece to it, and it's good to just understand is, maybe just explain a little bit about how you've seen open accounting being used, and then sort of how that links into the open banking piece. Do you want to comment, Nick, or put you on the spot?
Yeah, sure. So with mute off again. Get used to this now. So open accounting is, as you say, is very much like open banking, but what it does, it gives access to their accounting software. The good thing with that is you can get a really good picture of how someone was trading prior to this situation and how they're trading now, what their debtor position is. It gives you real insight to their assets and liabilities. It's probably more powerful tool for that than open banking for a company to enable you to form appropriate relationship and arrangements with them. And I think it's been highlighted. The partner that we've picked, they're not focused in this area, and because it is almost a step behind open banking, it is still in the process of being rolled out, and the focus of these organisations is generally on acquisition and account acquisition. So we are working as a partner with them to build their solution for collections. So you will want to see different data for collections and different scorecards, and you're able to build those with this, guys. I think it's an incredibly powerful tool.
Okay, I'm just looking at the results here as well, which is just going back here. So level of awareness of open banking generally amongst the audience is probably in that medium level. So there's a fairly medium awareness of open banking. Open accounting less so, I think. I think that's a great explanation. Thanks, Nick. In terms of that, which is 86% saying there's a low awareness of open accounting, and they're kind of similar in many ways. And we just put the third question up, which is just really around how whether people are starting to explore open banking with demo with vendors. So it's good to see how people look at that. I think the adoption piece was interesting. Just going back to one of your points, Sandy, and some of the comments we're having is certainly I've heard more around financial services and less in utilities so far. Definitely. So that backs up from your point of view in terms of what you're saying around adoption and adoption being low. That was coming from the vendor conversations we had.
Yeah,
I'm just going to go.
I think in this.
Go ahead, Sandy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think in this space, Chris, what we're going to see because of those fluctuating incomes is a need to actually have open banking so that you can flex the payments in line with changing incomes, and hopefully as we move past 2020, incomes will start to increase again. And it's important that you have a tool that retains the customer so that you can actually recover the debt, because if you don't have a tool that recovers the money and the customer leaves you, it's going to be far more difficult to recover the debt that's outstanding, and you want to build customer loyalty.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we put up the next couple of polls. So we talked a bit about the readiness around open banking or open accounting, but what about the customer side of things? And may I come to Andy, to yourself first? How do you think about one of the things in the poll was really around the readiness of open banking? They seemed like they were more ready from a council, local authority point of view than they were in utilities. Any thoughts around that? Or Andy, I'll just go to you for comment first. Maybe I don't know if you've got any thoughts. Or
yeah, and I've just in the Q&A that David's put on, and I think it asks a similar type of question in terms of is there any guidance around sort of customer understanding about what open banking is? And that was going to be the point I guess I raised to this point, which is I think getting customers to understand it in terms of what it does, how it works, could potentially help with some of the concerns that they have around it. And I think it's that opportunity to work with the customer, raise their understanding around what open banking does and the benefits to them. So you link that to the benefit point that has clearly come through on the survey results that talks about what's in it for me ultimately. I think the difficulty that utilities specifically, but probably broader, have is one, overcoming that inertia of trust, and secondly, exploring that conversation at the right time. Because if you're having that conversation at the point when the customer's already in debt and you're trying to drive it from an indebted perspective, it is quite a difficult time to have that conversation. So I think it's trying to have those conversations at the right time in a customer services journey is going to be probably quite critical. And it does feel quite an educational conversation, rather than you're in debt, so we need to do this to get you out of debt, which feels probably slightly more negative in that way. So it's difficult to answer, because I don't know how far you're probably close to this, Chris and Nick and everybody, than myself, in terms of how far advanced those conversations are in some of the organisations. It looks like it's relatively immature, and thus probably the thought about how to deploy probably hasn't been taken too much further than trying to understand what it gives access to at this stage, I would imagine.
Any other comments on that, or?
From what I've seen, Chris, the deployment's quite straightforward and can easily be embedded into the comms with the customer. And the solution that we're looking for, or the solution that we're supporting, does that pretty seamlessly. I think for me the most interesting point of all of this is the YouGov, where customers or the poll is suggesting that we'll have less resistance to doing this. I think if we could take some of that win into our SME base, a business stream, then we'd be quite happy to work that through. Given the regulation and given what we're having to do over the next 6 months, this decision tool has got to be really at the forefront of that. And I think it's really interesting to know that our customers will open up and start to use this. So quite easily to deploy, I think, to answer Andy's point, and really encouraging to see the polls suggesting that customers will take this and adopt this. And I think it really is, as Sandy was saying, I think really going forward has got to be the way we have to do this.
If you just go back to the data, I thought it was interesting, if you, on both the utilities and the local government, it's almost like the more value you offer, the greater the amount of adoption there is, right? So, so the first one was really around, I get more time to pay my bills, and the second one was like, I'll get a discount. So there's like a financial incentive, and it's almost like the more value, the greater the adoption is. And is it this sense of sort of, I'm giving data versus getting value, and it's the value that I associate with the data that I'm giving? Do you think there's a sense of that coming across?
I think there is, Chris, and I think also given the climate, we will want to sort of give as much forbearance to the customer as we can to meet the regulation requirements. And I think we are giving something back. We are saying to the customer, we want to help you through this, we want to defer this or payment holidays or whatever the solution that we offer them. But we will need to share. We will need some open and honesty, and for you to do that, then we're gonna ask you to join us for the open bank. And I think that's the conversation. So value back, we are prepared to work through. Value back to the organisation, it builds the brand. Value back to the organisation is we have a really strong decision point, a real strong decision data point that we can then go back on should this thing not quite work out as we plan going forward.
Yeah, Chris, picking up one of the earlier points, I think we've got to convince customers that it's a collaborative model, that it's not simply a tool, as Andy suggested, to actually extract money from them. It's got to be built on trust. It's got to be transparent. The customer's got to feel as if I have some control over this rather than you're forcing me to do it. Because I think if utilities can have that engagement and build that trust with the customer, then they will start to embrace the tool. They'll start to see the benefit of the tool linking to, their changing income. And I think it will also give customers reasons to stay with that utility that works with them during difficult times. And because most customers don't want to move away from the brand they trust, and 98% of customers pay their bills. So, if you can engage with them with the right model, I think you'll start to get customers embracing. I think it will take time, but everything has to start somewhere.
Where do people think the trust issue comes down? So I think the trust piece and just the differences between utility providers and local councils, I think is fascinating. But where does the trust people go? Why is that difference, and where does it come into that? And if you look at the actual open banking, like PSD2 and the legislation, it's kind of like the trust and the prevention is almost like built into the products. These products. Is it a marketing issue? Is it an industry issue? Is it a private versus public? Is it what are the thoughts around that? Why is the difference in trust between utilities and local councils?
I think it's there's two parts to it. Trust. Do I believe the data's secure, and how's that? Do I like sharing it? And then there's the trust about, so what are you going to do with the data once you've got it, I think. And I think that's probably the difference between a local authority and a utility. Whereas a local authority is seen, it's there to provide me services and support me. It's a community. There's no competition, and it's not a share held by shareholders. If I'm giving the data to a company that has shareholders that is trying to collect my debt, that may feel a little bit different. So I think that for me, the balance of tools, which is you're giving them discounts, but actually you're giving them tools, and it's about the conversation. And I think Stephen Poppard did a video recently, and being seen to help people get people out of debt rather than the debt out of people, I think creates a slightly different perception, and you're supporting them to get out of debt rather than getting the debt out of them. And I think that's the difference between, my view is that's the difference perception of the two organisations.
Okay, interesting.
Yes, I also think that utilities have suffered, from a lot of bad press, for various reasons, poor service, etc. So, and some of it is chasing debt based on, poor data. So the public perception is that they don't deliver a good service, and I think the opposite is true, because you get a very small number that don't get the service they're expecting, but the perception is the reality. So until we overcome that, I think it will be more difficult to engage with people on the trust aspect.
I think that's right, Sandy, but I think Nick just really nails that correctly there. So the conversations we have to do in collections in that front end is to change that conversation to working with people to get them out of debt and not to get the debt out of them. And if we can make that change, and if we can make that seismic change and get people to believe us and trust us, then that's got to be great for the brand going forward and great for those individuals. And I see open banking as a clear conduit for us to work together with openness to do that.
So Sandy and everybody, Keith, I think I actually agree with you, but I think that is the challenge. I think you hit the nail on the head, which is the seismic shift of doing that and having that conversation at scale in organisations that are struggling today with a number of things, whether that be volume, whether that be the number of conversations needing to be had. And then there's an educational piece linked to that, which is getting people to understand what open banking is, because I don't think it's widely recognised in the consumer market. So I think I absolutely hear all of that, but I guess I come back to the question that Chris, you posed to myself a little while ago, is how do we do that? Because that feels quite a big shift from where not just utilities, but many organisations will be today, which is processes that talk about getting customers out of debt rather than something different. So I think what we're saying is absolutely the right thing. What I think the challenge for organisations and us as an industry is, how do we make that change? Because that's quite different to how it works today for a lot of organisations.
Just moving the discussion on a little bit. So just going back to the question. So the polls is very much saying what we just talked about, I suppose. What is your customer readiness for open banking, open accounting? So 50% are low and 17% in no appetite. I mean, so that's 67%. So that seems like that's that marketing approach around how do we get that adoption coming across that Andy, you were just talking about. And then trust is definitely coming up on question 5 around main obstacles. So it feels like there's that trust, and how do they trust it, how do we work with customers is really coming across in some of those polls. Just as a segue, we're going to talk a little bit about branding, I think, and sort of marketing at the end as one of the topics I wanted to talk about. How do we market this and integrate it in our processes? But next, I just wanted to talk about what are the use cases, and we just put up question 6. And there's different ways that we can use open banking. You can use it in the acquisition stage. You can use it, tie it to repayment plans. Like income assessment. David, just on the questions you were just talking around, linking it with a DD adequacy review as well. I mean, what's the panel's view around? If you just pull the poll question up, but what's the panel's view around what is the use case for open banking? I mean, you look at it, it's got some great technology. You get very excited when you see it because the access to data, but how are we actually going to push it through? What's going to be the unique use case, the first use case that is going to sell it for customers and then into the companies, do you think?
I think to me, it's reasonably clear it's in 2 places to start with. I think first on the customer acquisition piece, I think it's a useful tool to have to understand the customer, to understand where they fit in your organisation, to understand where they fit in your roadmap. But equally as well, and in collections and risk, for me, it's at the back end, making sure that I'm going to make the correct decision that's going to work with that customer and get through the debt. So to me, the use case tends to be weighted a little bit more to the back end, because we need to bring some value back to the customer, work with them through their debt, and use this as a decision point. So the back end weighted slightly for me, but I believe it's got real power in the front end as well.
Any other thoughts or?
I think it can be, Chris. I think it can be in most stages of the customer journey. So if you look at it to the previous point, if you look at it, it can be used at acquisition to inform the product, the whatever the customer will be getting. If it's a customer services conversation, again, so it might be preempting the debt conversation that talks about we see there's some movement in some of the activity you're doing. So this is an option for us. It's positioned as a option and as a solution rather than a need. And to the latter point there, I think is then a link to the debt conversation around another ability and opportunity to help the customer. I think if the more it's talked about at each stage of the journey, the more the likelihood the customer is going to adopt it. It doesn't come out of the blue. It might be, let's say, rejected in the customer services conversation as well. I hear you, but I don't need that now. But then when it happens again, where the situations have got worse, because they're already aware and familiar with the conversation, it isn't quite as out of the blue for them to have that conversation. So I think there's an opportunity to implement it across the different stages of all elements of customer contact.
You're saying have it early because then they're comfortable with it. So then when it does come to it, then you don't have to get through that comfortableness as well. It's a bit like getting updated contact details.
Absolutely. So if it's part of your renewal and you get that as part of your renewal offering, then it's familiar. So when it does come to that point of conversation, it's not new.
And what's the view around sort of like re-authentication? So certainly with the in terms of like the open banking product, then you have to re-authenticate to get access to back to people's bank accounts. I mean, so how much of that do you think that's going to be a barrier? So having to re-authenticate throughout the collection cycle and those kind of things, does that limit the use case, or does it, is it if we have the right conversations, you think that will be less of a problem?
I think, Chris, that it's back to that collaborative approach. It's back to what Andy and Martin have spoken about, building engagement from, the first point of entry into the organisation, even before that, because you can start to, understand risk profiles of customers better. That's existing customers and potential customers. Utilities can potentially link tariffs to individual circumstances. So, this is where, I keep coming back to trust, but also the education. collaborative from the start. You know, we've got access to so many mobile phone numbers, emails. You know, we can just send out, you know, introductory emails, just starting to educate customers on open banking, open accounting, rather than, you know, they find out when we've added additional charges to their account. By the time customers get to enforcement, that could be £1,000. So the earlier engagement as to what tools are available to support the customer rather than, you know, it feel threatening. So important.
Which is good collections practice as well, right? So
Absolutely.
that's good. Yeah. So just going back to the poll question here. So it looks like we're tied somewhat between repayment plans and income assessment as being the key use cases. I don't know if we're going to talk a little bit about brand and loyalty play next, and I don't know if we just put questions 7, 8, and 9 up just in sequence as well. And I come back to the marketing points. We talked a bit about marketing. It's like if trust is part of it and customer awareness is part of it. Sandy, you just talked a little bit there around how to market to customers in terms of getting out there early. Are there any other ideas around how we can use that to how we can market this better? How can we get it more sustainable? Getting out early in the customer life cycle seems kind of key, really. But do the customers have the right information? Have we done enough around that yet? And what would the content of the marketing need to look like too? How do you broach that conversation? Is it tied to value up front in the cycle? I think, Andy, that's what you were kind of suggesting a little bit.
Yeah, I think it comes to Sandy's point just now. It's getting that education out there early, and it might just be some things like, you know, some email conversation that raises awareness to it, gets people familiar with the terminology and what it does, that then can be led on. So when the conversation actually happens, they're more familiar with it. So, and then if you could tie that to either a tariff or a discount or whatever the marketing element of that might look like, I think then generates the interest, doesn't it? So it's we want to do this. This is what it is. It gives us access. It allows us to make informed decisions. And for your, you know, added value, we will give you this element of discount or different tariff rating based on that. So it's wrapped up in a proposition. But I think Sandy's point was really good actually in terms of it. If you can get that into some collateral that is not linked to a debt conversation, it raises awareness to what it is and what it does and doesn't do. To Nick's earlier point, it gives access, but it doesn't allow you to do this, etc. So I think it's that knowledge build that I think will be quite important for customers to understand.
So it's almost
can you imagine? Hello?
Yeah, keep going, Sandy.
Yeah. Can you imagine a situation where, because of the action and the collaborative approach of utilities, that they could build case studies where they could talk about how they work together with businesses, you know, on, you know, matching payments to income fluctuating. And as a result of that, those businesses stayed in business and they thrived and they continued to be a customer because of the, you know, the loyalty that was shown by their supplier and the support that was shown by the supplier. Imagine we had many case studies over time that actually talked about that. That'd be quite powerful for the industry. Forget about company, for the industry to start to say, this is how we treat our customers, this is how we work with them, this is how we've enabled them to stay in business and provide employment to thousands of people.
I was going to ask a similar question on industry versus company, I suppose, which is, do you think if the industry developed their open banking solution, which was an industry branded solution, do you think that would you could all promote the brand and be sign up to that, and that would build confidence because it's an industry solution rather than an individual company branded solution?
No, I think it would make it. I think it would make it harder.
It'd be great.
Oh,
All disagreement there. So one of us saying it's hard, and one of the things it's going to be great to do it as an industry standard versus a company.
I didn't say it would be easy, Chris. So I don't know that we're disagreeing. I agree with Andy that it can be challenging because the industry as a whole, even if you take energy and water individually, we haven't done a huge amount of collaboration. But I think this is, potentially a platform where we can, but it won't be easy. I agree with Andy. It could be hard, but it depends how keen they are to embrace working.
Yeah, just to build on my quick point quickly there, Chris, and thank you, Sandy. My point was going to be, I think if you look at this trust point that we keep raising, is there less trust in the industry than the supplier that you've chosen to place your business with? That's the question in my mind that I can't necessarily see through. Is it the industry that people don't trust, or is it the company? Now you as an individual have made the choice of who to place your business with, and that's with the company. So I'd guess there would be more alignment to the company than to the industry. Is probably where my response came from. In terms of that, it would be difficult at an industry level potentially.
Yeah, and the trust might come from from the brand and the people you're with initially, and whether they've done that, have they been trustworthy upstream as well, or just generally in terms of does that generate the trust to be able to use it downstream? When you were talking, Andy, I was thinking a bit about almost like what's the value proposition, almost like at different stages of the customer life cycle. So the value proposition on acquisition might be very, very strong, but then you get past that fear element, and so you build the trust in that element. That means that the value at the back end probably is a little bit more weighted towards the company, but at that point you don't have to deal with the fear piece, so it's easier to get that adoption at the back end. So that's what I was sort of like mapping out as you were talking. So I thought that was very interesting. The next question's up, which is just go on question 7, which is how important do you think open banking will be in the future? So everyone seems to think it's going to be very important. The question up there now is just really around whether that's is it going to be a loyalty or a brand play? And so do you think, and I think the question there is really, do you think it can actually add to brand loyalty, or do you think it's a consequence of brand loyalty that you're going to get the adoption from this conversation here? There's a consequence of the company and its loyalties of the company and the brand, or is it something that can add further? So can we design it so it adds further to the brand in terms of adding that information? Because at the moment, I think the result's saying, well, look, it's a trade-off between I'm going to give you the data and I expect something back, versus it's like, well, we're going to get your data and we're going to give you something back. I suppose is the reverse of that. I'm using it to build my brand. And build loyalty rather than I'm using it to get information to then drive something. I don't know what people think on that. Any thoughts, or is it important for brand, or is it just something that we're going to do to companies? I think that comes down to the fundamental element of it as well. Even around your comment around debtors, Nick, is really, are we thinking about it as companies going to the customer, or are we thinking of it in the customer's shoes coming back to the company?
I like the latest question that's been asked, put to the audience, which is we're talking about they need to give us trust, they need to trust us to give us open banking, and I suppose the question there, which is quite open, is are we asking for open banking because we don't trust them to tell us the right thing? So I think that's a really interesting question. In my view, I think it depends on what you set up, because I've worked in collections for a long time, and I would say actually open banking helps in 2 categories of people. First category is the people that aren't that financially aware and want to pay you but are struggling, and often what they have a tendency to do, and the reason they're struggling is they're not great at financial management, and have a view of underestimating their bills, not including everything. And actually, open banking ensures you get the right payment affordable plan to them. The second group it helps with, that will probably be less likely to give you access, is the group of people that know how to answer a typical INE and don't want to pay. So it's the won't pays. Because, and I don't think you'll get, the chances of you getting access is quite low from that group of people. So I think it is an interesting question. It'd be great to get thoughts on Andy and Martin on the how do you build that trust, and is it the right? Are we showing a lack of trust back to the customer?
That's a good question.
I thought it also, Nick, it was a great question. So to me, it's open banking to frame that discussion. I'm not sure it's as clear as a trust or not trust. So it's enabling us to frame the discussion and really deliver something that's going to help the customer forward. And I think that's where the brand piece comes in. So I'm back to Chris's point. I think it's more from a brand loyalty perspective rather than necessity that we're trying to do this. We want to work with that customer. We want to see the customer through the bad times. We want to work with him, which will then undoubtedly bring us loyalty back. But we're unable to do that without framing that discussion. And I see the open banking being the frame or the framework to get that going in an open way.
Okay. Thanks, Martin. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I do like that question around the trust piece. I think it's a very interesting way to think about it. There's a couple of really good questions that come up on this webinar actually. The question to then just, I suppose, just to question 8 is just like, opportunity for open banking as a loyalty or brand play. So people's definitely seeing it as that loyalty or brand play that's ended. The one up there now is just how important is process integration. Just chat a little bit about process integration just while that's up. And I don't know if we just want to put up question 10 as soon as that one's done as well, interest of time. But, so in one sense, you can get open banking as a standalone product. You can look at it and it's sort of available sort of, online as a service. How important is it that we quickly plug this into the rest of our systems for use of things like triggers and limits and those kind of things? And how important is that for us to get started versus reviewing it sort of manually? Martin, I'll come to you, just put you on the spot, and you're a little bit further ahead and definitely an advocate of it. Are you seeing it as just as something we can just use and just get started almost like on a case by case basis, almost like on a separate monitor or on a separate screen, or is it something that getting it integrated is something I've got to get done really, really quickly because that's going to give me so much extra capability?
I definitely think it's the first part of that initially to get going with that. I think integration obviously has to follow quickly, but generally in our organizations, integration is a pretty tricky pathway if you can get in the queue anyway. So I think to me, I think it's a strong enough to get going. Let's utilize it to do that decision. Let's utilize it to make that customer work with us. And then let's try and integrate it, and then we can get the treatment pathways, etc., utilizing it. But I think that's a bit further down the line for me.
And Sandy and Andy, I mean, so more in the consumer space, which you've got slightly different volumes that are going on. I mean, what's your kind of view on that? Is it integration, or do you think we can just start, right? So, and how would we do that? Is there segments of the portfolio we go after, or thoughts on that?
Chris, I would come back to the earlier point I made. I think the first step is integration into your marketing and sales process, so that you communicate, you raise awareness, you educate the customer, so that they don't see it too late in the process. So it just becomes an integral part of the discussion that you're having. You introduce it to your contact center staff so they can, make customers aware of it. You can tie it in with your DD, process. You can also tie it in, as I said earlier, with particular tariffs, but it also gives you an early warning that a customer may be getting into difficulty, and then you can make a call or you can send an SMS to keen to speak to you. So for me, first step is, in that communication and engagement piece.
And Andy, any views? Particularly system integration, I think, as well.
Yeah, so I completely agree with Sandy on that in terms of the marketing element, in terms of that's the way to get customers familiar with it. The thing that's going through my mind is complexity of some of the organizations that we're talking around here. You've got web, you've got chat, you've got voice, you've got every other interaction channel because of the drive that organizations are going on to create choice for customer. So without integration within a residential marketplace is going to be really difficult, because the journey then becomes disconnected. So you might have a conversation with somebody about open banking. When you then go online, there's no reference to it, and there's no ability to do what is needed to be done. So I think that integration point is, for some of the larger, more residentially focused organizations, going to be a really important one to ensure consistency of journey. And I think that's probably going to be a critical part of this. I think you can move quickly with certain segments. So maybe if you did some segmentation on who's been impacted by COVID, and then maybe there's a sort of segmented approach there that you could take. But to get it out to the masses, I think integration to systems is going to be key, but is going to be very challenging to sort of Martin's point of, you've got to get on the roadmap for that sort of stuff, which takes time, as we know.
But there might be segments you could use it, for example, like high balance accounts or particular vulnerability. You could just start with that first, dip your toe in the water, and then do the, waiting for the integration piece, I suppose.
Yeah, very much so. I think if you could even identify customers that weren't in debt prior to COVID and now are, then there might be a very targeted approach you could have to some of those customers to test it and do a bit of test and learn around approach, method, conversation, and how to get that conversation going could be one way of doing it.
Yeah. Okay, really good. So we just got the last question. I'm not sure, it's almost done, but just really around, what do we think the final target should be for open banking adoption rate? Any thoughts on that? It looks like it's really around about that 10 to 25% at the moment. I mean, that sort of getting started. I think the sense I'm getting is maybe the first step is just sort of getting our feet wet a little bit, before we get too excited about it. Any thoughts just before we finish, or should we be very aggressive and sort of go up near the top? Someone else has just voted. So the sense. Yeah, go ahead, Sandy. Sorry.
No, I think 10 to 25% seems sensible for me, because not everyone will need to use open banking. So if you start to think about what proportion of the customers are likely to be affected by COVID-19, 10 to 25% seems a sensible number is a first target.
Okay.
I think it's an interesting metric to measure your trust. Well, we talked about trust before, which is it would be to measure how effective you are engaging within collections, which is what sort of percentage are trusting you to allow you access. So I think it's a good business metric, and then you want to see that increasing.
Interesting. So yeah, it looks like it's just finished now. It's between that 10 to 25, and then the other half is sort of a little bit more optimistic at that 45 to 60%. So obviously going to push harder, or want to push the organisation harder versus starting off. So we're almost out of time. I just wanted to thank everyone for their contribution. I think there are definite three things, really great discussion this time, and three great things that came out was, I think, we're working to get customers out of debt rather than the debt out of customers. I really like that. I think that the whole piece around trust, I think, was really super interesting, which was the question that came through around, we're going after open banking because we trust them. I think it links into the piece around value, right? Which is, how do we find value all the way along the customer journey to really sort of embed this in the process? And I think it's like those three, I think, almost like interlock into like, how do you then get adoption? Because I think clearly there's some great technology out there, but it comes back to that trust and value piece, really. So fascinating, really great discussion. So so I wanted to thank everyone again for attending, everyone on the in the audience for attending. It's really been a great discussion. Thank you to all the panel members for contributing. Really appreciate it. So I know it's really appreciate the time for everyone being on the call, their insight and input. What we're going to do we're going to basically consolidate all the answers. Any of the questions that we didn't answer fully, we'll send out the poll results to this group and the attendees today. One of the things we are thinking about is there might be some further drill down sessions around open banking, particularly around the awareness and our associated topics with it. So please, everyone, just keep their eyes peeled for those. And if you want to get involved, please do let us know. Just drop myself or one of the team just a note. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone again, and everyone have a great rest of the week. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Cheers, bye.
Thank you.